The first breath here is not clean. It sits in the throat, thick with smoke and damp straw, and something animal underneath, something that never quite leaves. The fire in the center of the hall has not been allowed to die. Not last night, not the night before, not in memory. Letting it go out means hours of work to bring it back, and hours are not something anyone here can afford to lose. Outside, a low gray sky presses down on a scatter of thatched rooftops, each one heavy with soot and morning dew, and between the houses the mud holds everything. Hoof prints, boot prints, the slow record of a village that has never stopped moving. This is Anglo-Saxon England, 900 AD. No running water, no medicine worth the name, no protection if you arrive somewhere alone. This is not a fairy tale. This is just Tuesday. Come a little closer. The day is about to begin. The house is one room. That is the first thing to understand. Not one room and then another, not a main space with a corner set aside for sleeping or cooking or privacy. One room, full stop, roughly 15 meters long and 5 meters wide, timber framed, wattle and daub packed into the gaps between the beams. A floor of earth that has been walked flat over years until it is almost stone, almost but not quite, because in wet weather it remembers what it is and turns soft and dark at the edges. The roof is thatch. It leaks in 3 places, which is considered manageable. The family has placed flat stones under the worst of them. There is no chimney. This is the detail that takes a moment to settle. The fire burns in the center of the room, not against a wall, not in any kind of hearth with a flue above it. Just a low stone-ringed pit in the middle of the floor where the fuel goes and the flames rise and the smoke goes wherever it can, which is mostly up toward the roof, where it gathers under the beams and drifts and thickens and eventually finds its way out through a gap in the thatch above. Eventually. In the meantime, it fills the room, not in the dramatic way of an emergency, not the black choking smoke of something gone wrong, but the ordinary gray haze of a building that breathes the same air it burns. Every morning the room is a little foggy. Every winter it is worse. Eyes adjust. Lungs adjust. Everyone here has adjusted, which is not the same as being fine. By middle age, most people in this village carry a cough that arrived sometime in their 20s and never left. Not a dramatic cough, not an illness exactly, just a presence. A rough edge on the breath, a clearing of the throat that happens without thinking. The children cough too, smaller versions of the same sound. Nobody marks it as significant. It is simply the sound a person makes, living here. At one end of the room, separated from the sleeping and eating space by a low fence of woven branches, 2 sheep and a calf stand in the semi-dark. They were brought inside last night, as they are every night, partly to keep them from the cold, partly to keep them from theft. Their warmth matters in a practical sense, contributing to the temperature of the room in winter in ways that can be the difference between a miserable night and a dangerous one. Their presence also means their smell, their noise, the particular intimate sounds of large animals breathing in a small space, like the soft clunk of a hoof against packed earth, a slow exhale from something much bigger than a sleeping child. The manure is shoveled out every morning and carried to the fields. The smell does not go with it. The sleeping place is not a bed in any sense that would be recognizable now. A wooden frame holds a sack stuffed with straw and dried bracken. The straw is shaken and turned but rarely replaced, used until it has broken down into a fine, dusty material that shifts under weight and harbors fleas and lice with cheerful efficiency. A woolen cloak serves as blanket. In winter, 2 or 3 bodies share the same space for heat, and this is not considered unusual or intimate in any remarkable way. It is just warmth arithmetic. The walls have no glass in their openings. Stretched cloth covers the gaps when weather demands it. Or wooden shutters close through most of winter, which means the only light inside is firelight, the room permanently dim, permanently warm, in that specific way of a space where something is always burning, the air never quite sharp, always a little soft around the edges. You stop and let this settle. This is not poverty in the way the word is usually meant, not failure or misfortune. This is simply the architecture of a life in 900 AD, the normal container of a human existence in Anglo-Saxon England, the the place where people are born and eat and sleep and grow old, where children take their first steps on this earthen floor, where someone sat last winter with a fever and recovered, where someone else did not. The house is warm. The house is smoky. Mind, the house smells like animals and bread, and the particular human scent of people who have nowhere else to be. Outside, the gray sky has begun to lighten almost imperceptibly. The woman at the fire blows gently on the coals. They glow orange, then settle. She does not look up. Her eyes sting, but that is just morning. The stream that feeds the village is also the stream that receives it. This is not a problem anyone has identified. It is not a crisis or an oversight or a failure of planning. It is simply the shape of things. The way water arrives and the way waste leaves and the way neither of those facts has ever been connected to the other in any formal way, because the connection has not been made yet, not here, not in 900 AD, not in any language that would allow someone to act on it. The stream runs along the eastern edge of the settlement. In the morning, it catches the light in a way that is genuinely beautiful, moving and clear looking over the stones, and children carry buckets from its banks the way children have always carried buckets, carefully, with the focused attention of someone trying not to spill. The water goes into cooking pots. It goes into the ale brewing. It goes into the mouths of animals, and occasionally, when nothing else is available, into the mouths of people. It also receives the runoff from the animal pens, the overflow from the midden heap, where refuse accumulates in a slowly composting pile at the edge of the settlement. The drainage from the tannery pit, where hides soak in liquid that smells sharp enough to make the eyes water from several meters away. After heavy rain, all of this moves. It follows the water table, finds the lowest ground, and the lowest ground is where the stream runs. When sickness moves through the village, which it does, reliably, seasonally, some people blame the water. Others blame bad air, or the position of stars, or the mood of God. Nobody has the tools to know who is right, and so the water continues to be used because there is nothing else. The solution that Anglo-Saxon England arrives at is not a solution in any deliberate sense. Nobody sat down and reasoned through the problem. What happened instead is that over generations, through accumulated loss and unspoken trial and error, a habit formed. The habit is ale. Ale is made by boiling grain in water. The boiling matters more than anyone here understands, because the heat kills what the cold water carries. The invisible things that make river water a slow form of harm. Fermentation adds another layer, the process of brewing, creating an environment hostile to the pathogens that thrive in standing or contaminated water. The result is a drink low enough in alcohol to be consumed throughout the day without incapacitation, which is important because it is consumed throughout the day by everyone without exception. Roughly 1 gallon per person per day. That is the estimate. Men working fields, women working hearths, elderly people sitting by fires, and children. Children drink ale because ale is what there is, filled into small clay cups with the same casual routine as any other part of morning, no ceremony, no commentary, just the cup passed over and the day beginning. The ale is not what modern brewing would produce. It is thin and sour. 'Tis closer to a weak fermented grain drink than anything celebratory, flavored sometimes with whatever herbs are available, not always pleasant, but reliably safer than the alternative. It is drunk warm, usually, or at whatever temperature the jug happens to be, and it sustains a population that has no other reliable option. What this means in practice is that the baseline condition of an ordinary day in Anglo-Saxon England involves a mild and continuous low hum of intoxication. Not drunk, not impaired in any dramatic way, just slightly softened at the edges, the way a person feels after a single drink taken on an empty stomach, held there across the whole arc of the day. Work still happens. Plowing, grinding, weaving, building, all of it still happens. But judgment operates through that soft haze. And children grow up with it as their normal, never knowing a morning that tastes like water because water is not something you drink here if you can possibly avoid it. The river remains the center of the village's physical life regardless. Animals are watered at its banks. Hides are soaked in it. Laundry is beaten against its stones by women who kneel in the shallows and work until their knees ache. It is the village's most essential resource and its most compromised one, both things simultaneously, with no contradiction acknowledged because no contradiction has been noticed. In the evening, the stream catches the last light the same way it catches the first, moving and clear-looking and genuinely beautiful over the stones. A child fills a bucket. The bucket is heavy. She carries it home with both hands, Nora stepping carefully across the planks laid over the worst of the mud, and nobody stops her, and nobody warns her, and the water sloshes gently against the rim all the way to the door. The worms are not the worst thing about life in 900 AD. They are simply the most universal. Roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm. Present in virtually every body in this village, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, running through the population not as an epidemic or an outbreak, but as a baseline condition of being alive here, the way background noise is a condition of living near a road. Nobody arrives at adulthood unaffected. Nobody escapes through luck or hygiene or careful habits, because the mechanisms of transmission are invisible. Because the connection between contaminated soil and contaminated food and what lives inside a human body has not been made and will not be made for centuries. The parasites move through the village the way everything moves through the village, through hands and food and water and the ground itself, through the simple daily contact of people who share a small space and eat from common pots and walk barefoot across earth that has absorbed generations of waste. The symptoms are chronic and low-grade, a persistent drain on energy, a subtle interference with the absorption of nutrients from food that is already barely sufficient, a quiet tax on bodies that cannot afford to pay it. What makes this stranger and harder to absorb is the monks. Sorrow. Monasteries in this period represent the closest thing Anglo-Saxon England has to institutional hygiene. Monks have access to latrines, dedicated stone-lined pits built specifically to manage human waste, separated from living and eating spaces, a genuine infrastructure improvement over the open ground arrangements of ordinary village life. By any reasonable assumption, the monks should be healthier. The parasites should be less prevalent among people with dedicated sanitation than among people without any. Archaeological evidence from monastic latrine pits tells a different story. Analysis of parasite remains from monastic sites suggests infestation rates were high among monks, in some cases higher than among the general population. The infrastructure meant to protect them was concentrating the problem instead. A shared latrine pit used by an entire community becomes a reservoir, each deposit adding to what the next person encounters, the very act of gathering waste in one place, gathering the means of transmission along with it. Nobody knows this. The monks continue using the latrines. The latrines continue doing what latrines do. And then there is the fever. In the eastern marshes and fenlands of England, in the low wet ground where the land does not quite decide whether to be water or earth, the mosquito known as Anopheles atroparvus is native, not imported, not a visitor, not the consequence of foreign travel or unusual circumstance, simply present, as it has always been present, breeding in the standing water of the fens each summer and moving through the warm months in the way insects move, without agenda, following warmth and blood. This mosquito carries malaria. Skeletal evidence from 46 Anglo-Saxon sites comprising thousands of individuals shows a clear spatial correlation between marsh regions and signs of chronic anemia consistent with malarial infection. Not a tropical import, not a disease of distant places, but an endemic feature of the English wetland landscape in this period, a recurring seasonal reality in the communities living near marshy ground. The fever arrives in cycles, first the cold stage, shaking chills that no amount of blanket resolves, then the heat, a temperature that climbs until thinking becomes difficult and the world loses its edges, then sweating, a drenching that soaks through wool and straw alike, then a brief respite before the cycle begins again every 2 or 3 days, reliable as a bad clock. Communities interpret this through the frameworks available to them: God's displeasure, a curse, a punishment for something unnamed or something done by someone else entirely. The marsh air is blamed, the bad smell rising from stagnant water, and this explanation is wrong in its mechanism, but not entirely wrong in its geography, since the same wet ground that produces the smell produces the mosquitoes. Treatment is prayer and herbs and the slow arithmetic of waiting. A man continues working through the early fever days because stopping is not a calculation that resolves in his favor. If he stops, his family eats less. The fever is a problem to be endured around the edges of the necessary things, carried into the field the way he carries his tools, as part of the weight of a day. Beyond parasites and fever, the body faces a steady accumulation of smaller sieges, skin infections from cuts that never fully close in time, respiratory illness compounded by a lifetime of smoke inhalation, tooth pain that has no remedy and nowhere to go but deeper into the jaw and occasionally into the blood. None of these are dramatic. All of them are present, a constant background pressure on bodies that are already working at the edge of what they can sustain. The village does not speak of this as suffering. It does not have a word for the alternative. This is simply what a body is, what a body does, what living inside one feels like in 900 AD on an ordinary Tuesday in Anglo-Saxon England. The man in the field adjusts his grip on the hoe. The fever is a little worse today. He works anyway. The bread is the foundation of everything, which makes what the bread does to a person over time one of the quieter cruelties of this world. It begins before dawn. A woman kneels beside a flat stone, a hand quern, two pieces of millstone grit that fit against each other in a motion that is simple and exhausting in equal measure. Barley goes in, coarse flour comes out. The motion is circular, slow, the kind of repetitive work that empties the mind while it fills the arms with a deep, specific ache that settles into the shoulders by mid-morning and stays there until sleep. This happens every day. Bread does not appear. It is manufactured, ground out of effort, that begins in darkness and ends in a dense, heavy loaf that comes off the hearthstone, warm and real, and genuinely satisfying in the way that something earned through physical labor is always satisfying. The problem is invisible, and it is inside every loaf. Millstone grit is exactly what it sounds like. The stones that grind the grain are themselves slowly ground by the process, releasing microscopic particles of grit into the flour, particles so fine they are undetectable by touch or sight, distributed evenly through every batch, baked permanently into every piece of bread produced in this village, and every village like it across Anglo-Saxon England. The grit goes into the mouth. It meets the teeth. And then, meal by meal, day by day, year by year, it does what grit does to a surface under repeated pressure. Archaeological studies of Anglo-Saxon skeletal remains have found that mechanical wear from stone-ground grit was a dominant form of tooth damage in this population, with abrasion outpacing decay as the primary cause of dental destruction in many individuals. Not cavities, not infection, though those are present too, but abrasion, the slow grinding flat of enamel surfaces that have no way to regenerate once they are gone. By the time a person in this village reaches their 30s, the chewing surfaces of their teeth have been worn to a fraction of their original depth. By their 40s, eating has become something that requires management, a careful navigation of what can be chewed on which side, a constant low awareness of which teeth can still be trusted. Eating becomes an act of endurance, not always, not dramatically, not in a way that anyone here would describe as suffering, or because this is the only set of teeth anyone has ever had and the only bread anyone has ever eaten, and there is no comparison available. But the mouth hurts in the background of meals, and people adjust without naming the adjustment, favoring one side, avoiding certain textures, swallowing things a little sooner than they should. The diet beyond the bread is not terrible by the standards of its time, but it is narrow. Pottage forms the other foundation, a thick grain porridge with whatever can be added to it, dried beans, foraged greens in season, an occasional scrap of salted meat, a bone boiled so many times the water barely changes color anymore but still goes into the pot because nothing edible is discarded here. Because discarding food is a concept that does not exist in a place where the margin between enough and not enough is measured in handfuls. Strips of salted meat hang from beams in the better provisioned households, cured by smoke and time, lasting longer than fresh meat but never quite as long as hoped. Cheese is made when the milk is sufficient. Eggs are eaten when the hens are laying. Fresh vegetables appear in summer and then do not appear, and the body adjusts to that absence the way it adjusts to everything here by continuing. Caloric sufficiency masks a more complicated truth. Most people in this village get enough food to keep working. The body runs on what it is given and performs what is asked of it. But protein is scarce outside of the slaughter season. Vitamins arrive and depart with the growing calendar. The diet that sustains a person through a summer of heavy labor does not contain what a body needs to fully repair itself, to maintain what should be maintained, to keep all the systems running at anything above functional. The hunger gap arrives every year without surprise. Late winter into early spring, when last season's stored grain is running low and nothing new has grown yet. Rationing begins not in crisis, but in quiet calculation, each handful of remaining grain measured against the weeks still standing between now and the first spring harvest. People eat less, work the same, and do not discuss it in terms of hardship because hardship implies an alternative. The loaf cools on the shelf. It is dark and dense, and it smells extraordinary, honest and warm and real. A child reaches for a piece, bites carefully, chews slowly on the left side. The bread is everything. Outside, the snow is still on the ground. The number that gets quoted most often is 30 to 35 years. Life expectancy at birth in Anglo-Saxon England, 900 AD, 30 to 35 years. And the first instinct is to picture a world of the very old dying young, of people at 25 already in the second half of their lives, of 30 being the age at which a person begins to visibly decline. That instinct is wrong, and the reason it is wrong is important. The number is an average, and the average is being pulled down by a weight so heavy it distorts everything around it. That weight is child mortality. Between 30 and 50% of children born in this village will not reach the age of 5. Not in unusual years, not during epidemics or famines, though those exist too, but in ordinary years in the baseline condition of Anglo-Saxon life. Somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 children will die before they are old enough to remember much of anything. From infection, from contaminated water, from fevers that climb too high and do not come down, from cold that finds its way through thatch and wool to a body that does not yet have the reserves to push back, from the accumulated fragility of a system that never had enough of what it needed from the beginning. When that many early deaths are folded into an average, the average stops describing adult experience and starts describing something else entirely. A person who survives childhood in 900 AD, who makes it past 5, who reaches 10 and then 15, and then the other side of the fevers and accidents of adolescence, can realistically expect to live into their 40s or even their 50s. Not comfortably, not easily, but plausibly. The 35-year figure is not their story. It is the story of everyone who did not make it to their first day of school. What the survivors carry is something different. A person of 35 in Anglo-Saxon England has been breathing smoke since birth, in a room with no chimney, for 35 years. They have been eating stone-ground bread for 35 years, and their teeth reflect every one of those years in the flat, worn surfaces where enamel used to be. They have carried intestinal parasites for most of their life, the chronic low drain of that invisible population inside them, compounding the nutritional inadequacy of a diet that was already narrow. They have worked physically, heavily, from the age at which they were capable of carrying anything, and the body records that work in the spine and the hands, and the particular way a person moves when movement has stopped being something done freely and become something managed. By 35, a cough is a permanent resident. By 35, the back has opinions about bending. By 35, eating is navigated rather than simply done. This is not tragedy in the way the word is usually deployed. It is not exceptional or remarkable within this world. It is simply what a life looks like when it has been fully used in the conditions available. The woman who moves through her morning tasks at 38, adjusting her posture without thinking, chewing on one side without noticing, pausing at the hearth to let a cough pass before continuing, is not a figure of suffering. She is a person doing what people do, which is continue. Death here is not private. It does not happen behind closed doors in dedicated rooms with dedicated professionals managing the process and its aftermath. It happens in the same room where everything else happens, in the one-room timber house with the smoky fire and the animals at one end. The body is present. The grief is present. The village absorbs it collectively, and the absorption is genuine and communal, and then, because it has to be relatively quick, the fields do not pause for mourning. The fire needs tending. The bread needs grinding. Children's graves cluster near the church wall. Many of the mounds are small, some very small, and the village has developed around this reality a series of quiet adaptations. In some communities, children are not named until they have survived their first winter, a practical emotional defense against a loss that has a near even chance of arriving. The causes of death that would be trivial in any other era are what finish people here. A cut from a scythe that becomes infected and then becomes systemic and then becomes fatal over the course of 2 weeks that feel very long. A tooth abscess that spreads into the jaw and then further. A birth that goes wrong in one of the ways births go wrong when there is no intervention available beyond what the midwife's hands and knowledge can provide. A fever in February that just does not break. She moves through the morning, back bent at the particular angle that has become her angle, eyes slightly narrowed from years of smoke, one hand flat on the hearthstone for a moment, weight steadying. Then she straightens, picks up the bucket, and continues. This is not the end of anything. It is just Tuesday. In Anglo-Saxon England, you do not exist alone. This is not a philosophical observation. It is a legal fact with immediate practical consequences for every person alive in 900 AD, consequences that begin the moment those connections are broken and do not end until new ones are established, which may never happen, depending on circumstances. Identity here is relational. You are not a person with rights who also happens to belong to a family and a lord and a community. You are a person whose rights are constituted by those relationships, generated by them, dependent on them, in the same way that a fire is dependent on fuel. Remove the fuel and the fire does not diminish. It stops. The legal structure of Anglo-Saxon England recognizes the individual as a unit of belonging. Your family vouches for you. Your lord vouches for you. Your community knows your name and your history and the particular texture of your obligations and your standing within the web of mutual accountability that holds a village together. As long as those threads are intact, you have legal existence. You can make claims. You can seek justice. You can stand before a court and be heard. Arrive somewhere alone without any of those threads, and something very specific happens, or can happen legally, within the framework of the law as it exists in this period. A stranger with no affiliations, no family to claim them, no lord to confirm their status, no community to speak on their behalf, has no legal protection against being claimed. The law permits it. The economics of the period make it attractive. A person who belongs to nobody belongs to whoever decides to say otherwise, and the decision can be made and acted upon within hours of arrival. Slavery in Anglo-Saxon England is not a footnote in the historical record or a marginal phenomenon operating at the edges of polite society. According to the Domesday Book census of 1086, over 10% of England's population were enslaved, and that figure comes after generations of gradual manumission. In the period before, the numbers were higher. Slaves work fields, serve households, are bought and sold at markets that operate openly with records kept and transactions witnessed. The church in this period has theological reservations about the enslavement of fellow Christians. But society does not reorganize itself around those reservations. The mechanism that keeps most people from this fate is the Thane system, and it is worth understanding clearly because it is not kindness and it is not cruelty. It is mathematics. You give your lord loyalty. You give labor, a portion of what you produce, your presence when called upon, your compliance with his judgment in disputes. In return, you receive protection, access to land to work, and the legal existence that comes from being a known quantity within a recognized structure. The transaction is honest in its terms. It is also not optional, not in any meaningful sense, because the alternative is the condition described above. Freedom to leave exists theoretically and almost nowhere else. Land ties people to place in ways that go beyond sentiment. To abandon a holding is not simply to walk away from a house and some fields. It is to risk losing the right to work any land at all, to arrive at the next village in exactly the condition most dangerous to arrive in, which is alone and unaffiliated and therefore legally vulnerable in ways that the road does not protect against. Movement happens. People do leave, but it carries a weight of uncertainty that makes it a last resort rather than a choice. Women in Anglo-Saxon England occupy a more complex legal position than the later medieval period often afforded them. Anglo-Saxon women could own property in their own right. They could make contracts, inherit, hold land, and pursue legal claims. This is real, and it is meaningful, and it is also contingent in ways that matter. A woman with a living husband and established family connections has practical legal standing. A widow without male relatives in a community that does not know her is in a different position, one the law does not fully account for, one that depends on the goodwill of neighbors and the absence of anyone willing to exploit the gap. The Lord's Hall stands at the edge of the village, visible from most of the settlement, taller and more solid than any other structure, thicker beams, wider roof, a hearth large enough to heat a space that exists partly to display the fact of its own heating. Tribute arrives regularly: grain, wool, cured hides, the accumulated labor of the village made portable and delivered. Protection is promised in return, and sometimes delivered and always cited. The traveler at the village boundary stands very still. He has been walking for 2 days. He is alone because the man he traveled with fell ill 3 settlements back and did not continue. He carries a staff and nothing that identifies him. He can see people moving between the buildings. He knows he needs food and somewhere to sleep. He does not know what his aloneness looks like from the other side of the fence, and the people watching him have not yet decided what to do about it. After everything, this is the part that is hardest to hold in the mind at the same time as everything else, but it is also the part that is most true. These are not broken people. They are people who have never known clean water, who carry parasites in their bodies the way they carry calluses on their hands as an unremarkable feature of existence. People whose teeth are being slowly ground flat by the bread that keeps them alive. People who breathe smoke the way other people breathe air, who live inside a legal system that can erase them if they stand in the wrong place without the right connections, who lose children with a frequency that the modern mind struggles to absorb without flinching. All of that is true, and also, and at the same time, entirely compatible with the following. They laugh. Not politely, not decorously, but properly, the kind of laughter that bends a person forward and makes them grab the nearest arm for support. The kind that starts with one person saying something at exactly the right moment and ends with half the room incapacitated and someone wiping their eyes with a sleeve and the other half demanding to know what was said. Stories by firelight spiral into impossible exaggerations, and the room leans in, children abandoning the pretense of sleep, an old man laughing before the punchline because he has heard this one, and it is still good. People fall in love. Clumsily, usually in beet fields and at well sides, through the elaborate indirection of people who have no vocabulary for what they are doing, and therefore do it in the language available to them, which is vegetable metaphor and bad poetry, and the very specific bravery of reaching for someone's hand in the dark and not quite making contact and trying again tomorrow. Old women sit in semicircles at the well with the focused intensity of professionals, processing the village's social information with a precision that no formal institution could match. Everything is noted, everything is filed. So everything will be retrieved at the exact moment it is most useful, which is usually when someone is standing right there trying to look unconcerned. The alehouse is not merely a solution to the water problem, though it is that too. It is the social heart of the settlement, the place where the day is processed out loud, where the specific miseries of a particular Tuesday are handed over to the communal attention and returned slightly lighter, where warmth and noise in the presence of other people does what warmth and noise in the presence of other people has always done, which is make the world feel like a manageable size. Folk medicine in this period is not simply superstition wearing the clothes of knowledge, though some of it is that too. Garlic against infection has genuine antimicrobial properties that hold up to scrutiny centuries later. Certain herbal preparations work through mechanisms nobody here can name, but that function regardless of whether their function is understood. The knowledge is empirical, accumulated across generations of observation, passed through hands and kitchens, and the quiet expertise of women who know which plant does what to which symptom and have known it since childhood. Religion is not experienced by most people in this village as an external imposition on an otherwise secular life. It is the framework inside which everything else happens, the explanation for suffering that makes suffering bearable, the reason the child died that is wrong in its biology and necessary in its humanity. The priest at the front of the small dark church is not always a figure of authority. Sometimes he is simply the person who stands with you while something terrible is happening and says words that help, not because the words are accurate, but because they are said, because someone is there, because the darkness has been named and therefore is slightly less dark. Festivals arrive like punctuation, not always formally sanctioned, not always traceable to any specific saint or event, sometimes apparently invented on the spot by collective agreement and celebrated with the full commitment of people who understand viscerally that joy is not a luxury to be deferred until conditions improve, because conditions do not improve, because this is the condition, and joy either happens now or it does not happen. The resilience embedded in the ordinary is not the dramatic kind, not the kind that gets named and remembered. It is the kind that lives in the act of waking up before dawn and stirring the embers and beginning again, not from inspiration, not from hope in any conscious sense, but from the deep animal persistence of a creature that does not know how to stop. Evening. The hearth burns steady. Someone has started a story. Something about a ghost, something with sheep in it. The room leans in. Outside, the wind moves through the thatch. Inside, for this hour, the smoke sits high, and the fire is good, and everyone is warm. It is not nothing. In 900 AD, on a Tuesday, with everything that Tuesday contains, it is very far from nothing. The fire has burned low. The stories have ended. One by one, the bodies in the hall have stilled, breathing slow and deep under wool cloaks, and the smoke sits quiet under the beams, and the animals at the far end shift occasionally in their straw, and the darkness inside the longhouse is the particular darkness of a place where nothing more is required of anyone until morning. But there is always one last thing. A figure moves through the dark with a small clay lamp, stepping carefully over sleeping forms, easing the door open with the practiced quiet of someone who has done this every night for years. Outside, the air's cold and clean in the way that night air is always clean, and the stars are out, thousands of them, scattered across the sky with the indifferent abundance of something that has never been asked to mean anything, and means everything anyway. He crosses the yard. The barn door opens with its familiar creak. Inside, the animals breathe in the darkness, warm and slow. He moves between them, one hand trailing gently along a flank, checking by touch what the lamplight barely shows. Everything is where it should be. Everything is still. He stays longer than the task requires, because this is the part of the day that belongs to no one's obligations, the quiet at the end of the long work of being alive. He does not know that the water he drank today was slowly harming him. He does not know the name of what lives in his body or what the smoke has been doing to his lungs all these years. He knows the barn and the cold and the stars and the particular sound of animals sleeping. It was enough. It had to be. Sleep well. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Ready for more? Click here to watch the next video and keep the momentum going.